Every empire thinks it's eternal, right up until the Golden Boy burns it all down. Horus Lupercal, the first found, the Warmaster, the Emperor's favorite son, his chosen heir, the warrior who stood at the head of humanity's armies, conquering world after world, dragging entire systems into the light of the Imperium. Horus wasn't just a commander, he was a legend. When he entered a war zone, victory wasn't just likely, it was inevitable. Whole armies laid down their weapons rather than face him. Entire planets swore loyalty at the sound of his name. And more than that, he was loved by his brothers, the other Primarchs, by the mortal soldiers of the Imperial army who followed him, and most of all, by the Emperor himself. The bond between father and son was ironclad. Horus wasn't just a general. He was the Emperor's right hand, his chosen Warmaster, the one who would lead the Great Crusade to its glorious end. But love can turn to pride. Pride can turn to doubt. And doubt, whispered by the right voices, becomes poison. The Horus Heresy didn't begin with bolter fire. It didn't begin with the siege of Terra or with betrayal on the black sands of Isstvan. It began in the shadows, with a wound not to the body, but to the soul. Because even the mightiest warrior in the galaxy can bleed. And when Horus bled, chaos was there to catch him. This is not just betrayal. It is the greatest tragedy in human history. When Horus turned, he didn't just betray the Emperor, he cracked the galaxy itself in half. 18 legions plunged into a civil war of apocalyptic scale. Seas of blood spilled in the name of gods humanity was never meant to worship. Worlds burned. Brothers slaughtered brothers. Titans clashed in endless ruin. And at the center of it all, one man, one choice, one fall. This is rotten lore. And today, we dive into the story of Horus Lupercal, the brightest son of the Emperor, the champion of humanity, and the architect of its darkest age. Chapter 1. The Favored Son. Horus Lupercal, the Emperor's first rediscovered son, the golden child of the Great Crusade. When his name was spoken, it was with reverence, pride, and, later, bitterness. But before he became Warmaster, before he became the Arch Traitor, he was something else entirely. He was the favored son. To understand Horus, you need to understand where he came from. Chthoniya. Chthoniya wasn't a green jewel of life. It wasn't even a ruined hive world like Nostromo or Olympia. Chthoniya was dead long before Horus drew his first breath upon it. Its crust had been hollowed out by millennia of strip mining, corporate greed ripping the world down to its bones. Whole continents were networks of tunnels, and when the companies abandoned it, they left nothing but gangs to fight over scraps. Life on Chthoniya was short, brutal, and meaningless. A child learned early that survival meant stabbing before you were stabbed. Loyalty was worth nothing. Trust was suicide. And this was where Horus was cast by the warp. This was the crucible that hardened him. By the time the Emperor found him, Horus was no naive child. He was already a warlord, a killer who had learned how to bend men to his will, not just with the blade, but with the force of his personality. And unlike other Primarchs who had to be broken to heal, Horus looked at the Emperor and recognized something greater. He didn't resist, he didn't rage, he submitted. Because deep down, Horus understood power when he saw it. And this is where Horus's path diverged from his brothers. The Emperor raised him personally. For decades, before any other Primarch was found, Horus fought side by side with his father. This wasn't just a commander learning under another commander. This was a son being shaped by a father. And the Emperor? He too was changed. Cold, distant, calculating. But with Horus, there was affection, pride, something the other Primarchs would never taste. While Angron bled alone in the arenas, while Mortarion coughed in the toxic mists of Barbarous, while Kurz stalked his world like a cursed phantom, Horus had his father. Every victory, every campaign, every moment of triumph was shared. The bond was real, and that bond made the eventual betrayal all the more devastating. Horus's legion reflected him perfectly, the Luna Wolves. They were not ornate like the word-bearers who sang hymns into battle. They were not tragic artists like the Emperor's children. They were not reckless berserkers like the World Eaters. They were precise, relentless efficiency. At the siege of Rylus, when the humans on the planet refused to join the Imperium, they retreated into their city fortress, Rylus. It was Horus who fought by the Emperor's side. He stood back to back with the Emperor himself until a plasma bolt hit Horus, taking him out of the battle. The Emperor stood over Horus and protected him. He did not yield any ground. He fought until reinforcements arrived and led them to victory. At the Battle of Goro, against an Orc empire that had built a scrap world, the Luna Wolves fought with ferocity against the Orcs, exterminating them. During the battle, the Emperor was separated from Horus and his custodian guard by the giant Orc Warboss. The Warboss tackled the Emperor, held him up by his neck, and began to choke the life from him. Horus fought through the horde, limbs flying left and right, Orcs dying by the dozen. Just in the nick of time, Horus severed the Greenskin's arm, and together they slayed the Warboss, repaying his debt to the Emperor from the siege of Rylus. Horus wasn't just a general. He was a figure who inspired love and fear in equal measure. To his sons, he wasn't just a Primarch. He was father, and in turn, he made each Luna Wolf feel seen, valued, part of something greater. That's what made them fight harder than anyone else. Not because of fear, not because of fanaticism, but because of him. Then came Ullanor, an Orc empire so vast it threatened whole sectors. Dozens of human worlds enslaved, countless billions at risk. It took the combined power of multiple legions to even begin the war. The Ultramarines, the Salamanders, the White Scars, all fought and bled. But it was Horus who broke the back of the Orc Empire. On the fields of Ullanor Prime, the Luna Wolves fought through endless Orc fortifications, while Horus himself personally led the decapitation strike. He cut down the Orc warlord in a duel that shook the planet. And in the aftermath, at the greatest triumph the Imperium had ever seen, the Emperor made a choice that would alter history forever. Before the gathered Primarchs, before the armies of man, he named Horus Warmaster of the Imperium, the Emperor's heir, the commander of all legions, the chosen son. The celebrations shook the heavens, the legions roared, but not everyone was smiling. Perturabo, Primarch of the Iron Warriors, clenched his fists and swore it should have been him. Angron, Primarch of the World Eaters, cursed that Horus was being rewarded for clever tricks while he bled in the dirt. Fulgrim, Primarch of the Emperor's children, smiled but seethed, his pride wounded. Even Leman Russ, Primarch of the Space Wolves, and Rogel Dorn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists, brothers who loved Horus, looked at him with a shadow of doubt. And Horus? He basked in it. He had what none of them did: the Emperor's trust, the Emperor's crown. But crowns are heavy. Not long after Ullanor, the Emperor did something that cut deeper than any blade. He left. He returned to Terra for a secret project, a project he refused to share with Horus. He handed him command of the crusade and gave him nothing else. No explanation, no trust. Horus, who had grown up with his father always at his side, suddenly found himself alone. And into that silence, the whispers crept. The word-bearers had long since been dabbling in forbidden faiths. Lorgar's priests whispered of gods in the warp, gods greater than the Emperor. And they looked at Horus and saw the perfect vessel. Their chaplains told him what he already feared: that your father has abandoned you, that your brothers envy you, that only you can carry humanity into the future. At first, Horus dismissed it. He still believed. He still carried the weight of the Warmaster with pride. But doubt doesn't need truth to grow. It only needs silence. and the Emperor's silence was deafening. So here was Horus, the Emperor's favored son, the chosen Warmaster, the most brilliant commander humanity had ever known. He had everything: the love of his legion, the respect of his brothers, the trust of the Imperium. And yet, beneath the crown of victory, shadows grew. And soon, those shadows would whisper his doom. Chapter 2. The Road to Damnation. Horus's star was at its brightest. The Warmaster of the Imperium, commander of the Emperor's armies, undefeated in battle. But beneath the victories, the road to his fall had already begun. And those first steps were taken not by gods, but by his fellow Astartes. It began on a cursed world called Murder. When the Luna Wolves, the Emperor's children, and the Blood Angels landed, they expected another swift compliance. Instead, they were thrown into hell. The ground was infested with the megarachnids, insectoid killers as large as dreadnoughts, armored in chitin stronger than steel. They wove webs that could slice through Astartes' plate, cocoons that dissolved warriors alive. Saul Tarvitz of the Emperor's children wrote of squads being wiped out in minutes. Lucius fought duels against the creatures, killing dozens but nearly being consumed himself. Captain Ralderon of the Blood Angels led desperate counterstrikes to hold the landing zones. Whole squads vanished into the alien jungles. Horus rallied the legions, calling down orbital bombardments that burned swaths of murder into molten wasteland. It was brutal, but in the end, the megarachnids were broken. But the victory carried a shadow. For the first time, the Astartes saw how fragile even their strength was. And Horus saw it too. In the middle of all this, a civilization calling itself the Interrex arrives. Unlike other civilizations, the Interrex were not enemies. They were advanced, disciplined, and willing to talk. A hybrid society of humans and Xenos, they lived with balance and restraint. They didn't worship the Emperor, but they weren't hostile. The Interrex were a human civilization that had endured the age of strife, not through conquest, but through balance. They coexisted with alien species, building a fragile peace that stretched across the stars. When Horus and his fleet made contact, he saw a mirror of what the Imperium could be. Cooperative, not imperial. They greeted him with cautious respect. For a moment, it seemed possible that war could be avoided. Horus walked through their libraries and spoke with their leaders. For the first time, Horus glimpsed another future, one built on diplomacy instead of conquest. He respected the Interrex, even admired them. His officers, like Garviel Loken and Tarek Torgadon, wondered if perhaps the Imperium could have an ally instead of another corpse. But Horus was not alone. With him walked Erebus of the Word-Bearers. Erebus had no intentions of peace. While Horus debated peace, Erebus prowled the Interrex's vaults. Among their relics, he found the Anatham. In secret, he had infiltrated the Interrex's sacred vaults, defiled their relics, and stole the Anatham. The Anatham was no ordinary weapon. A cursed blade, forged to wound not just the flesh, but the soul itself. A single cut could never truly heal. When a target's name was spoken to the blade would not rest until its target was killed. Even if the target was struck once, it was enough to kill any target. The Interrex, horrified, believed the 16th Legion had come to plunder, not to parley. The Interrex accused the Imperium of treachery. Negotiations collapsed. What might have been an alliance turned into another war. And the Interrex, with weapons unlike anything the Imperium had seen, hybrid human Xenos technology, elegant and lethal, turned on Horus's fleet. The battle that followed was brutal. The Interrex weapons were punching through Space Marine power armor with ease. The Luna Wolves fought furiously through the palace to secure Horus. The Legion tore through the city streets of the Interrex capital. Bolter fire barked. Boots hammered through the city streets like war drums as they fought to get Horus off-world. Horus had sought peace, but instead, he unknowingly left with a cursed weapon, a weapon that would one day be turned against him. For the first time, Horus felt true failure, not on the battlefield, but in trust. He had wanted peace, and instead, through Erebus's deception, he gained only another enemy. And in the back of his mind, doubt whispered louder. The Emperor was gone, withdrawn to Terra, and Horus was alone. Was this what his father's dream truly was? Endless bloodshed, endless betrayal? Erebus smiled, because the trap was already closing. The knife that would wound Horus had been placed in the right hands. On murder, Horus saw the cost of endless war. With the Interrex, he saw the futility of peace. And in the Anatheme, his doom was already forged. The road to damnation was not a single step. It was a slow march. And Horus had already begun it. Chapter 3. The Wound of Davin. Davin was sick, not just rebellious, not just unstable. It was rotting. Once, it had been loyal, a compliant world brought into the Imperium by the Death Guard. It should have been nothing more than another fortress depot. But when Horus returned, he found something different. Davin had become a corpse, and that corpse still twitched. The air itself was poison. A haze of spores and buzzing flies choked the skies. Whole oceans had congealed into filth, bubbling like infected wounds. Forests collapsed under their own rot, becoming walls of fungus slick with ooze. And everywhere, the dead walked. The people of Davin were no longer human. They were plague zombies, swollen with corruption, coughing clouds of pestilence with every shamble. Their flesh sloughed from bone, their eyes were pits of pus, but still they moved. Still they fought. When the Luna Wolves landed, they expected resistance. What they found was horror. Fire teams were swallowed whole in swarms of the walking dead. Bolter fire cut dozens down, but each corpse only split open to spread more disease. Flamers turned mobs to ash, but the smoke itself poisoned lungs. The Mournival, Abaddon, Aximand, Torgadon, and Loken fought at Horus's side, hacking through endless waves of rot. They saw warriors dragged into the sludge, their armor dissolving around their bones. Whole squads fired until their barrels overheated, only to be pulled screaming into the mire. For every step forward, they paid in lives. At the heart of the corruption, they found it, a downed ship, once imperial, now twisted beyond recognition, the glory of Terra. Its hull was split open like a carcass, decks crawling with mold and organs fused into steel. What had once been bulkheads were now ribs of bone. The air inside reeked of bile and decay. Marines gagged in their helmets as they forced their way in. And there, waiting for them, was the traitor governor, transformed into a champion of Nurgle. Bloated, dripping disease, maggots crawling in the folds of his flesh. And in his hand, he carried the Anatheme. The governor whispered to the Anatheme, Horus Lupercal, and the fight began. Horus faced him, Warmaster against corrupted mortal. The Anatheme slashed like it had a mind of its own. The battle was short, but fateful. The Anatheme cut deep, slipping through Horus's armor as if it wasn't there. The Warmaster staggered, wounded in body and soul. The governor was slain, but the damage was done. Horus fell, struck by the Anatheme once, but it was all it needed, his blood fouling the swamp, his body racked with fever almost instantly. The greatest warrior of the Imperium was dying. As they arrived back on their ship, a crowd of people had formed. Word had spread that the almighty Warmaster had fallen. The Luna Wolves, overwhelmed by the current situation, clubbed their way through the crowd to forge a path. The Luna Wolves tried everything. Apothecaries worked without rest. Medicae stations burned with activity. But nothing stopped the infection. Horus's body swelled with corruption, skin splitting and leaking foul ichor. His breathing turned ragged, his eyes clouded. The Anatheme's curse wasn't just killing him, it was unraveling him. Despair spread through the camp. Abaddon raged, demanding vengeance. Torgadon prayed. Even stoic Loken felt the shadow of dread. Their Primarch, their father, was dying before them. And then, the snake, Erebus, spoke. He told them there was another way. The Emperor could not save Horus, but the Serpent Lodge could. And in desperation, the Mournival agreed. They carried Horus into the warp-tainted temple, laying him at the center of a circle etched with unholy symbols. The ritual began. Horus's soul was cast into the warp. And of course Erebus always has to find a way to slither his way into things. He came to Horus wearing the face of an old friend slain during the Compliance campaign on the planet 6319 and member of his Mournival before Loken replaced him, Hastur Sajanus. Horus, delighted to see his old friend, but also confused. After talking with whom he thought was Sajanus, he found himself walking through visions, memories and lies twisted together. He saw the Emperor, but not as a father, as a tyrant, cold and calculating, building an empire not for humanity, but for himself. He saw visions of the Imperium's future, trillions ground into dust to feed Terra, worlds burned for disobedience, humanity shackled to a throne of lies. And then came the gods, the voices of chaos whispering promises. You are the chosen son. You have been abandoned. Your father will discard you when you are no longer useful. But we will give you truth. We will give you power. In the dream, Horus walked through battlefields of fire and saw his brothers kneeling to him. He saw the galaxy torn open, not by the Emperor's hand, but by his own. They played on his pride, showing statues of the Emperor everywhere, while not a single statue of Horus stood. The Lodge whispered again, "The Emperor lies. He is no god. But we are. Take our gift, and you will save mankind from his chains." Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Suns, a legion known for its psychic powers, interjected, trying to show Horus the lies he was being shown. How his so-called friend, Sajanus, was not who he said he was. It was revealed that Erebus was playing as Sajanus, and even after this he convinced Horus he only did this so that Horus would listen. The real reason? Erebus wanted to exploit Horus's trust and his grief over his lost friend and trusted ally. And Horus listened. He thought of Chthoniya, of his youth, of the Emperor who had raised him but then abandoned him to Terra's secrets. He thought of Ulanor, of the crown that weighed so heavy. He thought of Davin, of failure, of betrayal. And in his fever dream, Horus reached out and accepted the god's offer. When Horus awoke, the fever was gone. The wound still burned, but it no longer consumed him. He stood again, the Warmaster reborn. But he was no longer the same. The anathema had cut deeper than flesh. In the Serpent Lodge, chaos had claimed him. On Davin, Nurgle turned oceans into pus and forests into slime. On Davin, plague zombies dragged whole companies into the muck. On Davin, the Warmaster fell. The galaxy had not yet realized it, but this was the moment the Horus Heresy truly began. Chapter 4. The Warmaster Reborn. When Horus returned from Davin, he was not the same. His body healed faster than anyone could explain. The wound that should have killed him still burned, but it no longer threatened his life. His strength was restored, his voice commanded with new fire, and his presence felt larger, darker than before. To his sons, he seemed unstoppable. To his enemies, he would soon become unimaginable. But what truly changed was unseen. In the Serpent Lodge, Horus had bent his knee, and though he would not yet admit it, he now carried chaos within him. The Mournival noticed first. Abaddon and Aximand rejoiced that their father lived, but there was something different in his eyes, a shadow that had never been there before. Loken and Torgadon whispered of it too, though they dared not speak openly. Horus wasted no time. He gathered his captains, and he began to speak of betrayal, not by them, but by the Emperor. Horus told them that the Emperor's truth was a lie, that he had already abandoned his sons, leaving them to die in the void while he built his palace on Terra. He told them of visions, of a future where the Imperium was nothing more than a cage, a galaxy enslaved not for humanity, but for one man's hunger for godhood. He spoke with the conviction of prophecy, and the Astartes who heard him believed. For them, their father's word was truth. It was Erebus who pressed the knife deeper. He whispered to Horus that his near death had been no accident, that the Emperor wanted him gone, that Davin had been left to fester as a trap. Horus, enraged and betrayed, listened. And for the first time, the Warmaster began to believe that the loyalty he had given was misplaced. And then came the campaigns. Horus led his legion with renewed ferocity. Worlds burned beneath his spear tip. But now there was a difference. Instead of enforcing the Emperor's truth, he encouraged his sons to look beyond it. The word-bearers, still stung by their earlier punishment at Monarchia, eagerly allied themselves with his cause. Lorgar himself, the prophet of chaos, met Horus in secret and bound their destinies together. And that destiny? A galaxy at war, and the declaration that the Emperor's dream was a lie. And only by embracing the truth of chaos could humanity survive it. When the Mournival questioned the need for such destruction, Horus silenced them with a single phrase. We are no longer his crusaders. We are our own. But he did not stop there. In the Strategium, beneath the torn and blackened banners of the Luna Wolves, Horus gathered his captains. Horus said, "These colors, these names, they are his, not ours. They bind us to Terra, to chains we no longer wear. We are not his wolves. We are not hounds chasing a master's command." There was silence. Torgadon shifted uneasily. Loken's face tightened. Abaddon, however, leaned forward, fire in his eyes. "Then what are we, Father? Name us, and we will be it." Horus descended from the dais, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. "We are no longer his legion. We are mine, and we shall bear not his name, but mine." The chamber stirred. Even the most battle-hardened warriors felt the weight of it. Loken spoke up. "My lord, we are the Luna Wolves. Our history, our honor." Horus cut him off with a raised hand. "Honor? History? Tell me, Garviel, what honor is there in servitude? What history is there in chains? The Emperor would see us kneel, forgotten, while he builds his empire without us. No longer. From this day forward, we are the sons of Horus. My sons, my blood, my will." The chamber fell into silence. Then, Abaddon slammed his fist across his chest in salute. "We are your sons, Warmaster, and through you, the galaxy will burn." One by one, others followed. Aximan bowed. Torgadon hesitated, then saluted reluctantly. Loken's voice was quiet, strained. "If this is the path, Father, I will walk it. But I fear where it leads." Horus placed a hand on his shoulder, smiling with a predator's pride. "Fear not, Garviel. The galaxy is ours to claim, and fear belongs to our enemies." Above them, the silver and white banners of the Luna Wolves were torn down. In their place, new colors were raised, deep sea green, marked with the eye of Horus. The Luna Wolves were dead. The sons of Horus were born. Chapter 5. Isstvan 3. They thought it was a war. Horus's orders looked routine on the surface. Rebels to crush, a world to pacify. Nothing the legions hadn't done 1,000 times. Transmissions from orbit said standard compliance. Drop zones were plotted, objectives marked. Seize the Coral City, crack the curtain of trenches and pillboxes, push to the palace heights, decapitate the separatists. Clean, efficient, the kind of thing the legions could do in their sleep. Dawn over Isstvan 3 was the color of old brass when the first wave fell. Drop pods screamed through cloud and flak like iron meteors, slamming into boulevards, parade grounds, and the shattered ribs of Manufactoria. Thunderhawks knifed in behind them, hatches already yawning as assault squads leapt before the skids kissed stone. Above it all, the long shadows of God engines crossed the city, Reaver and Warhound Titans striding out from their landers, void shields humming, carapace guns panning as if the machines sniffed the wind for prey. The defenders were ready. The Coral City's outer districts had been rebuilt into a maze of death. Switchback trenches, wire gardens, interlocking fields of fire from sandbagged blockhouses and hab towers turned into redoubts. Vox horns howled across the lines, siren songs and catechisms that made the air itself vibrate. Cult mobs surged forward in answer, throwing themselves toward the drop sites in a human tide. The Sons of Horus hit first. Green armor punched out of pods and fanned into firing lines with drill book clarity. Auspex sweeps mapped the kill lanes ahead. Heavy bolters and support squads set their bipods and spoke in measured, punishing bursts. Advance by twos. Breach team left, Melta up front. On the mark, move! The 16th crushed the first trench lips under disciplined fire and hard, ugly bayonet work, shock assault pure and simple. To the south, the Death Guard made war like a landslide. Cataphracti-armored Terminators thumped down cave-dark stairs into the bones of the city. Reaper autocannons sawing bunkers to slag, while breachers slapped shaped charges against steel doors and turned them into suns at arm's length. When the smoke cleared, phalanxes of pale, blunt-voiced Astartes pushed forward through the breach, bolters talking in a steady, merciless cadence. Emperor's children advanced like a scalpel. Fire teams snapped from cover to cover with a dancer's timing, purple and gold flickering between marble colonnades shot to lace. 2 and 2, cut that embrasure, a captain barked, and a pair of plasma guns hissed in perfect unison, silencing a murder hole. A second later, a combat squad was already ghosting through the gap, knifing the bunker from behind with bolt pistols and blades. And the World Eaters, the sirens were for them. The louder the Vox whales got, the harder they moved. Chain axes revved into a serrated whine as Angron's sons poured into the forward trenches, vaulted the wire, and fell upon the first ranks of cultists like a red avalanche. Streets ran liquid under them in minutes. Gutters frothed as blood sluiced downhill. Some Astartes captains tried to leash the frenzy. Hold the line, hold! But the sirens burrowed deep, turned orders into dull echoes under the skull thunder of rage. They didn't take trenches, they erased them. The defenders poured everything into the meat grinder. Heavy stubbers burned barrels dry. Autocannon belts rattled empty and were fed again with shaking hands. Rocket teams popped from culverts to spit-shaped death into Astartes squads, then vanished before the reply fire chewed the brick to powder. Every time a trench was taken, another 30 meters back spat flame as a new line woke and the dance began again. Towering above all this, the Titans made war like walking cathedrals. Dies Irae stood like a mountain at the vanguard of the strike force, an Imperator-class Titan whose very presence bent the horizon. Its triple-barrel volcano cannons glowed molten, ready. Its macroplasma turrets hummed with divine wrath. Under its feet, the ground trembled in percussion with every servo step. When the combat began, Dies Irae led the Titan Corps forward. Warhounds flanked its legs. Reavers marched in line behind. The smaller Titans moved like shadows in its wake. From its high command dais, the Princeps called down orders. Focus left flank. Clear the bunker cluster. Shots lanced from twice its height. A bunker belt connected by braced barricades melted. A wave of cultist defenders disintegrated in a single blast. Titan crew gunners adjusted fire as debris rained. The roar from its void shields cutting was like thunder rolling across mountain peaks. Inside, the crew prowled the decks with engineered cold. The machine spirit, chained in devotion, whispered tactics, counted burn times as it laid waste to the enemy. Together with its crew, Dies Irae drove a spear of fire through the city's heart. Under it, trench lines buckled, resistance bent, and the world around it ignited under the weight of its commands. Warhounds loped down grand avenues, their turbo lasers scything through wire and ferrocrete revetments with surgical flashes of heat. One ducked its wolf skull head to rake a flak tower. The tower answered with a point-blank macro barrage that hurled the scout engine halfway through a hab block. It rose, void spitting blue lightning, and planted its feet. Fox 2, fire! The turbolasers spoke again. The tower folded upon itself like wet paper and bled smoke from 100 seams. A Reaver took a broader approach. It waded into a field of macro emplacements that had been pummeling the landing zone since the first pod hit stone. Volcano cannons and meltablasts turned gun shields to slag and crews to mist. Its Apocalypse launcher sent a bouquet of sub-munitions pattering across parapets and into the mouths of trenches that wouldn't stop spitting. Around its ankles, Astartes swarmed, tiny, tireless ants with melta charges and brute courage, finishing what the God engine started. Inside the lines, the work was uglier. Bunker by bunker, floor by floor, stair by stair. Breach teams stacked on doors while a tech marine hissed, "Charge set, 3, 2, burn!" And the world became a disk of white light and hammering sound. The first 2 through took the ricochets. The next 4 put rounds into every shadow that twitched. Medici hauled groaning bodies back by their collars, gloved hands sticky and black. Someone always slipped on blood going down a staircase and laughed a few beats later, breathless and a little unhinged because laughing was faster than thinking. In the palace approaches, a giant walked. Ancient Rylanor, Contemptor class, strode the high causeways like a living statue, each footfall cracking flagstones that had been old when Old Night began. Bolt cannon thundered from his fist. A las cannon beam carved a stitch of white through a line of heavy weapons and turned men and sandbags to vapor. "Hold your line, sons," his voice told over the vox, deep and calm as a cathedral bell. "Advance with purpose. Leave no cruelty unanswered." The separatists tried to break the momentum with blind courage. They threw armored columns into the avenues, old tanks with new paint, guns that were more rust than steel. The sons of Horus answered with crack grenades and melta-fire, turning engine decks into orange geysers. When the armor died, mobs rushed the gaps with knives and homemade charges. The Emperor's children cut them down in precise sheets of fire, then stepped forward over the cooling brass and kept moving. A flare went up, green over the eastern ridge. A Death Guard Terminator cadre had reached a flak spire, chewing thunderhawks out of the sky, and gone up the inside like a slow storm. Storm bolters hammered in the half-dark. A Reaper autocannon droned until its barrels glowed, then went silent, while its gunner swapped a drum with gloved, unhurried hands. Minutes later, the tower's teeth went quiet. Someone on the ground cheered. Someone else started breathing again without realizing they'd stopped. For all that, it never felt quite right. The defenders didn't fight to win. They fought to hold, to draw blood, to fix the legions in place. Vox horns kept up their siren song until the housings melted. Cultists threw themselves on bayonets as if dying there was the point. Every time a corridor was cleared, another collapsed, and smoke and dust made you cough inside your helm. Ammunition tallies came back tight. Medici reported solvents degraded by contaminants in the air. Nothing broke cleanly. Nothing routed. By midday, the first objectives were in hand. Outer trenches taken. The western bunker line shattered. 2 bridges across the canal secured and held against counterattack. Titans standing guard like iron saints, while their machine priests soothed hot reactors with hymn and oil. Resupply markers placed, an Emperor's Children Vox officer reported, voice clipped and perfect over the static. Second and third echelons to advance through. Anchor points established at grid mark. On a terrace above the palace gardens, Rylaner took in the field through heat-hazed optics. The city lay below like a wounded beast, smoking, stubborn, still dangerous. "We endure," he said again, mostly to himself, the words a habit older than some hives. In the alleys behind the lines, the World Eaters cooled in the way they knew, pacing, flexing, cleaning gore from chains with movements halfway between ritual and impatience. A captain planted his axe in a shattered step and leaned on it, helm lenses staring toward the next district like a hunting cat eyeing a hedge. "Open it," he growled to no one in particular. "Let's see the teeth." Across the net, a Sons of Horus lieutenant's voice came dry. "You'll get your fight, brother. This city has plenty of teeth." And overhead, in a dusty piece of sky that no one on the ground bothered to look at twice, launch racks began to cycle. Servitors bowed under the weight of long, ominous canisters. Red seals were broken with murmured catechisms. A gun captain checked coordinates that had been locked for hours and didn't yet understand the shape of the order he was obeying. On the streets below, the legions took another trench, another bunker, another 100 meters of killing ground. They set firing arcs. They marked LZs with smoke for the resupply that had always come, on 1,000 worlds before this one. It felt like war. It felt exactly like war. And that was the point. Saul Tarvitz was no fool. He had fought too many wars to ignore the gnawing pit in his stomach. Something about Horus's orders didn't sit right with him. He had convinced Rylanor to allow him to remain aboard the Andronius, overseeing resupply and orbital fire coordination. His brothers, including his old friend Rylanor, had already descended to the surface to battle the rebels entrenched across Isstvan 3. But as Tarvitz reviewed the ship's operations, he noticed something off. The munitions decks were bustling. Too much activity for a containment action. The servitors moved in perfect silence, overseen by officers who avoided his gaze. Crates sealed with the sigil of the Life Eater virus were being loaded into planetary bombardment tubes. Servitors carried canisters marked with red tape, strapping them to tubes. Something wasn't right. They should be loading high explosive ordnance, not... And then it hit him. These weren't siege rounds. They were virus bombs. Tarvitz confronted one of the deck overseers, but the man's silence told him everything. He realized the truth. Horus wasn't cleansing the rebellion. He was about to cleanse them. The Loyalists. Tarvitz sprinted through the corridors, his boots pounding against the deck. Vox channels were restricted, sealed by Warmaster command. No warnings could be sent. If he was going to save his brothers, he would have to do it himself. He reached the flight deck, hijacking a Thunderhawk gunship. The crew tried to stop him, some out of loyalty to Horus, others just confused. But Tarvitz was faster. He gunned the engines, bursting out into the void as alarms blared across the hangar. But he wasn't alone. 2 interceptors launched from the Andronius, their guns locking onto him. Horus had given the order. Tarvitz was a traitor, and he was not to reach the surface. Yet fate had other plans. Aboard the Eisenstein, Death Guard Captain Nathaniel Garrow stood at the helm when the command came to destroy Tarvitz's Thunderhawk. Garrow and Tarvitz had become honor brothers after the pre-Axor campaign. Tarvitz voxed Garrow, begging him to see the truth. Isstvan 3 was going to be virus bombed and that they had been betrayed. Garrow hesitated for only a moment, then turned his guns on his own. His ship's cannons ripped through the interceptors chasing Tarvitz. The explosion hid Tarvitz's escape, clearing his path to the surface. Garrow reported that the 2 interceptors chasing Tarvitz were caught in the blast. Garrow had made his choice. Tarvitz would live to warn the loyal. Descending through the choking atmosphere, Tarvitz pushed the Thunderhawk to its limits. Vox channels screamed with static as he hailed his brothers below. "Fall back! Seek shelter! Horus means to kill us all!" On the ground, the Loyalist forces were in the thick of combat. The Emperor's children, the Death Guard, the Sons of Horus, and the World Eaters. All had warriors who remained faithful to Terra, still believing the Great Crusade stood for truth. They fought with discipline, taking trench lines, clearing bunkers, advancing through the burning Coral City. Overhead, Titans of the Legio Mortis and Legio Ataris strode through the carnage, their weapons scorching entire districts. Their crews had received the same message: cease fire and seal your god engines. But even among those god machines, betrayal stirred. Within the mighty Dies Irae, chaos spread. Loyal Titan crewmen argued with their traitor counterparts as orders came through from orbit. Some pleaded. Then, the traitors turned their guns on their own, slaughtering their brothers in the control decks. The loyalist crews were dragged from their stations, executed by their corrupted comrades who swore allegiance to Horus. Then the sky fell. From orbit, the first of the Life Eater bombs were launched. Sleek silver canisters dropped silently, their descent almost beautiful, until they burst. The virus spread like wildfire. In moments, it infected every living thing it touched. Soldiers died choking, their flesh turning to paste, their organs liquefying, their bodies collapsing into bubbling pools of rot. The loyalists who heeded Tarvitz's warning raced for shelter, sealing themselves in bunkers, under cathedrals, or deep within fortified trenches. Rylanor, ancient and unyielding, stood atop a half-collapsed structure and watched in horror as the city died. From within his dreadnought sarcophagus, he was safe from infection, but powerless to help. Around him, billions perished in minutes. The virus ripped through the planet, eating away at any living thing in its path of destruction. Plants decayed, wildlife melted away. Nothing was safe from the virus's insatiable hunger for flesh. Billions melted into pools of organic goop. It ate away everything until there was nothing left. Its appetite was so great that after eating away all organic life, it cannibalized itself. Just as quickly as the virus was fired into the atmosphere, it withered away. And then came the fire. As the virus consumed all organic life, the atmosphere thickened with volatile gases, methane, carbon, and the toxic fumes of decay. When Horus gave the order, cyclonic torpedoes were launched into the upper atmosphere. The resulting ignition turned the entire world into a fireball. The seas boiled, the cities evaporated. The once blue skies of Isstvan III became a curtain of flame. From orbit, the traitor fleets watched in silence. Horus's face remained unreadable, his eyes reflecting the inferno below. 100,000 of his own sons had died, burned alive, melted, or incinerated in his betrayal. And to him, it was necessary. During all of this, Horus gathered all the remembrancers together. While they thought they were going to get a great view of the ensuing battle, they were really lambs led to slaughter. Horus ordered his soldiers to open fire into the crowd of remembrancers. Every single person in that room died, blood pooled, sinew from bolter rounds exploding in soft tissue littered the floor. Not every remembrancer was killed. Captain Iacton Cruz, an old veteran from the days of the Luna Wolves, helped Euphrates Keeler escape, who would later become the first prophet and saint of the Imperium, along with Kirill Sinderman, who would help with the founding of the Imperial Inquisition in the future. But the loyalists below, they endured. Tarvitz's warning had saved nearly 2/3 of the loyalist Astartes on the planet. Those who survived emerged into a nightmare, ash falling like snow, the ground carpeted in the charred remains of the dead. Yet even then they refused to surrender. Among the burning ruins, Captain Saul Tarvitz and Captain Garviel Loken raised their blades and rallied what was left of the loyal legions. They would not die cursing their names. They would die as sons of the Emperor. And high above, Nathaniel Garrow, haunted by what he had witnessed, made his own decision. He would escape aboard the Eisenstein, carrying the truth of Horus's betrayal to Terra itself, racing like his life depended on it. Because it did. The galaxy was burning, but this was where the fires truly began. Horus had made his decision. He betrayed his brothers. He betrayed his friends. He betrayed the man he looked to as a father some time ago. But Horus wasn't done. No, this was only the beginning of his fall. This has been part 1 of the rise and fall of Horus Lupercal. Stay tuned for the next part by hitting the subscribe button and turning on post notifications. And please leave a like and a comment if you enjoyed this video. This has been some real rotten lore.